Hey folks, my name is Jen, and today I'm coming at you with a slightly different video. So in honor of today when I plan on getting this video up, of it being April 14th, and the 110th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, I wanted to do a video chatting about the event, recommending some content about it, and talking more in depth about one of the victims, more specifically his works. So, I know that this is a tale that most people are familiar with, so I'm going to try to make this short-ish. Or at least the section about the Titanic, I'm going to try to make it short. So the Titanic was a British luxury passenger liner, its official name being RMS Titanic, which RMS stood for the Royal Mail Ship. There's quite a few ships that were technically that. The ship was part of the White Star Line, which was this like impressive passenger liner ship company. There was a couple of different companies doing things at the time, and White Star Line was one of the big ones. Yeah, the Titanic was part of the White Star Line, with its sister ships being the Olympic and the Britannic, one of which I think was built around the same time as the Titanic. Work on the Titanic began in 1909 and was completed in 1911 when the boat was launched, but it didn't actually take its maiden voyage until several months later. The ship featured 4 elevators, a substantial first class dining room, a swimming pool, exercise equipment, and like a little gym, had electricity all over, and large first and second class rooms with modest but comfortable third class berths. Basically, there was every modern convenience of the time available on board for the comfort of its passengers. The ultimate comfort of the passengers was focused on first class passengers, the rich and elite, but things were also fairly comfortable for second and third class as well, just not as comfortable. Now, the Titanic's maiden voyage set off on April 10th, 1912 from Southampton, England. Its destination was New York City, which it never reached. The ship was touted as the largest passenger ship in the world, and its owners boasted that it was virtually unsinkable. Their hubris was paid back tenfold. Reports of icebergs had come in several times from other ships. Most messages were relayed to the bridge, however, a few of them, especially the later ones, were not. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, one of the lookouts spotted an iceberg a little too late, most likely due to the fact that the lookout binoculars had been misplaced earlier that evening. They sounded the alarm, and the Titanic was beginning to turn, but was not fast enough to avoid a collision. The ice sliced through the side of the ship like a can opener through tin, basically. 5 compartments ruptured, spilling gallons of water into the ship, which actually caused it to list, further allowing for water to then move into even more compartments. Distress signals were sent to other ships, but unfortunately most of them were too far away. There was apparently a ship that passed by, but never answered them and never turned back or anything. Lifeboats were launched. Unfortunately, there was not quite enough lifeboats per passengers, as the ship was thought to be unsinkable, and the boats themselves could hold less than the amount of passengers that were on board. Women and children were ordered first into the boats, although there were several men who also managed to sneak on and survive. The planning, however, in filling the lifeboats was also poor, as the lifeboats could actually fit more people than were actually shoved into them. I believe there was one account where there was only 27 passengers in the boat, when in reality the lifeboat itself could have fit about 65 or 66. The water continued to rise, and unfortunately, due to a lack of notice across the ship of the urgency in escaping, many third-class passengers did not realize the danger until it was too late. A little after 2 a.m. on April 15th, the lights flickered out across the ship. Those in the lifeboats then watched in horror as the ship listed further, its bow submerged. With a great crack, the ship of dreams broke into two, and the pieces were quickly swallowed by the sea. Passengers who were not on board still or were sucked down in the maelstrom were thrown into the icy water. Most of them died of exposure. The Carpathia, which was another passenger ship, did answer the distress call. They were one of the furthest ones away. They arrived around 3:30 a.m. to a very grisly sight. They were able to pick up all of the survivors, however. Of the 2,208 souls who sailed aboard the Titanic, only 705 actually reached New York alive. There have been claims that some of the exits to first-class areas were blocked due to classism, sealing the fate of third-class passengers, many of whom were poor immigrants. This was famously, of course, part of a pretty intense scene of the, Titanic movie that came out in the 90s. I did find a couple different accounts of this, some of which agreed with this claim. Others were stating that actually it was due to a lack of alarm sent around the ship, and the fact that the third class berths were the furthest away from, I think, the common areas, so it would have taken them more time, and the fact that the compartments were already filling with water quickly did not help either. I think they were kind of cut off and at a disadvantage from where their berths were. Either way, though, it does seem that Captain Smith did not give everyone a fair chance, whether this was due to classism or simply panic. No one will ever really know. If you are interested in learning more about the tragedy, there are a few accounts that I can recommend. For books, there is first and foremost The Story of the Titanic, as told by its survivors. This is by two passengers, Lawrence Beasley and Colonel Archibald Gracie. One of the ship's officers, the only ship's officer to survive, I believe, his name was Commander Lightoller, and one of its wireless operators, Harold Bride. There is also Molly Brown, Unraveling the Myth by Kristen Iverson, which follows the unsinkable Molly Brown. It follows her life, but it also does talk about the event. Fun fact, she actually was never called Molly until, that whole unsinkable thing became, part of her life. She was known as Margaret, because that's her name, Margaret Brown. Then, of course, there is talk of the discovery of the ship many years later. Robert Ballard was one of the scientists who discovered the wreck in the 80s. He's written a few books on the topic. I recommend The Discovery of the Titanic, which also features a lot of really cool photos. Some of the archived photos, which I have hopefully found copies of and put up for you here, of the interior of the place, as well as photos that they took when they ultimately discovered it. You could also read this Titanic Exploring the Discovery of a Lifetime, National Geographic. That was pretty interesting as well. Other media that I can also recommend would be firstly a documentary called Titanic's Ghosts, using DNA to identify the victims, which was really fascinating and also really sad. The Six is a fairly new documentary about the 6 Chinese survivors who were, they survived the wreck but were then barred from entering the U.S. after being rescued due to a really racist law that was still in effect at that time. You can, I assume, probably thank the president at the time, which I forgot what his name is. Is it Wilson? I think it was Woodrow Wilson. You can probably thank Woodrow Wilson. He was kind of an asshole. But yeah, so that's a documentary about them, which is also really interesting. And of course, there is the National Geographic special about the Titanic, which is also really interesting. If you're interested in fiction surrounding the Titanic, there is there's so many, like, movies, shows, books, etc. having to do with it. There's the ultimate James Cameron movie, if you're interested in that. There is also, as far as books go, there is Voyage on the Great Voyage on the Great Titanic, which is part of the Dear America, like, fake diary series. It's for children, and but you know, I don't think there's any problem with adults reading it either. It's fairly good writing overall of events. And then there's also Raise the Titanic by Clive Cussler. It's a Dirk Pitt novel. It was written pre-Ballard Discovery, so it's highly inaccurate at this point, but it is still really entertaining. This is per my dad. I haven't gotten around to read that one yet. Personally, tales of this tragedy have both fascinated and horrified me since I was very small. We have a family story about one of my grandparents, my grandpa, one of his relatives, having missed the boat. I was around 7 or 8 when the James Cameron movie came out, and I was not really allowed to watch the whole thing, probably because of the boobies. But I did end up catching a few scenes here and there when my folks were watching it at different points, and I honestly remember being fairly traumatized by the sinking sequence. So my dad has always been super fascinated with the disaster and the wreck's discovery, mostly the wreck's discovery, to be honest. He's super into that kind of thing, and a huge fan of Robert Ballard. Subsequently, I also became interested in learning more, despite that early traumatizing movie scenes. I've seen a lot of the documentaries, read a lot of the books, I've looked up articles, magazines, seen the musical, both Titanic and Unsinkable Molly Brown. Unsinkable Molly Brown's a lot of fun. It barely has anything to do with the Titanic at all. It's mostly just about Margaret Brown, but it's, and I think also highly inaccurate, but it's Debbie Reynolds and she's a gem. So I've seen a lot of those, read a lot of things, and I've also pored over the somewhat creepy old photographs, which I've tried to include in here, some of them, so you can share my nightmares. In 2019, me and one of my best friends visited Las Vegas. While we were there, one of the sites that we ended up checking out was the Titanic Experience, which is housed at the Luxor, like, resort and casino. The Luxor is the one with all the pyramids and the Sphinx and stuff. There's no cameras allowed, so I only have this one photo that I took of the outside, but I was able to find some more photos, a couple more of the inside the experience that I'll also try to put up here so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. When you buy your tickets, guests are also given a replica steamship pass. I've misplaced mine, which sucks because I really wanted to show you guys. It's really cool, and I think it's fairly accurate to what people know the passes looked like at the time. Basically, they give you these passes, and it assigns you the name of an actual passenger who sailed on the ship. The exhibit features, you're then taken through everything. There's a replica of a room. I forget whose room. I think it might have been one of the ship's officers. There's a replica of the grand staircase. Of course, you can pay extra money to get your photo taken there. So they've got like some replica things, but the exhibit actually features display cases of items that they did bring up from the ocean floor. It sounds like they are currently trying to bring up as much as possible from the floor of the sea because just the silt and everything, the seismic shifts, is basically sucking down all of these artifacts. I believe originally the plan was to kind of leave it as a memorial and grave to those lives lost, but money and the responsive archaeologist, I guess, everyone's trying to bring up as much as possible at this point before it's lost forever. So yeah, there's like these display cases full of items that they've brought up, some of which are identified or assumed to be items belonging to specific passengers, and the rest are all just common area items that, you know, a lot of people aboard the ship would have used. There's also a room, a part of the exhibit, which opens up like a portion of the deck, complete with the starry, cold April night. And it also has a huge chunk of iceberg jutting out nearby that you could actually touch. It's pretty eerie to be out on this kind of replica deck. There's even a hunk of the hull which was recovered, and the massiveness of it was really impressive and also incredibly spooky. Besides being like this melancholic metal memorial, you know, to those who were lost. It's, I think, made the biggest impression on me out of anything that I saw in the exhibit. Was just this giant hunk of the hull, which I honestly never thought I would actually see in person, because, I mean, the ship's on the ocean floor. I'm not about to get in a submarine and go take a look, you know what I mean? So, like, I was not, I was just blown away by being in the same room with this. It, like I said, was very sad and also really creepy, actually, and really makes you see how huge the ship was. This was like an incredibly personal experience. While I've read and seen lots of media attached to this event, there was nothing quite like the sadness and empathy that I felt while learning about those who were on board, while looking at their pictures and then bits of their luggage or fragments of plates that they probably ate fancy breakfast off of. At the end of the experience, guests are then brought before like this wall right before you exit. And it's separated into two sections, victims and survivors. So then you go with your little pass and your passenger name, and you try to find them and see what their ultimate fate was. They were probably mentioned as passengers aboard at some point. If there was any personal effects also in there, personal accounts. So then, yeah, you will go and see if they actually made it. My passenger was Lily Mae Futrell. Mae was a first-class passenger who boarded the ship with her husband Jock in Southampton. The two of them were both writers. Mae had written for ladies' magazines and had also written her own novel and helped collaborate on a story with her husband Jock. Jock was fairly famous at that point, and he also wrote for newspapers and magazines, but he'd also written a fairly successful mystery series. He wrote several detective novels. So yeah, the two of them were both writers. They were really happy, loved each other very much, had 2 children together. At the time of the sinking, Mae was desperate, from all accounts, to remain with her husband and absolutely refused to leave him. Jock eventually pried her off of himself and shoved her into a lifeboat and told her, you know, she has to think of their children. Their children, I believe, were around 16 and 14 respectively at that time. He told her that she had to think of them ultimately, as they're not like orphans, and he told her, for God's sakes, go. She went, and his body was never found. Every personal story I'd seen in the exhibit had touched me, but this account really haunted me. Just the amount of emotion behind that parting. in an already fairly traumatic experience. And I mean, they lived in Scituate. They were a Boston couple. I live in Massachusetts. I'm a writer, at least an aspiring one. I ended up feeling kind of a kinship with this couple. I remember them off and on for months until I decided to hunt down their books. May's novel was published in 1911 and it's called The Secretary of Frivolous Affairs. It appears to be a comedy. Most copies of her books are fairly expensive because it does seem that it is out of print. So I am still trying to locate a reasonably priced copy, but that's a work in progress. Jock's works were slightly more easy to obtain. This is a modern printing of a collection of his stories featuring the thinking machine, who is, as it says here, the original ACAD scientist, who insists that 2 + 2 = 4, not some of the time, but all of the time. I'm guessing Big Brother would disagree. Am I right? I'm sorry, that was a bad 1984 joke. So there is actually an introduction to this compiled series by Harlan Ellison, who's also an author. He mentions the sinking and May briefly, but his focus, of course, is more on the thinking machine and its impact overall, and honoring, Jacques Futrelle's efforts. As a huge mystery fan, I did feel also that it was part of my duty to read this early mystery series that potentially inspired Agatha Christie. Besides her well-known obsession with Sherlock Holmes, just the pure intelligence of the scientist, maybe that's, partially behind Poirot as well. I don't know. I really loved this collection. There are parts of it that honestly age it quite a bit. But it is a collection of stories from the turn of the 20th century, So it's yeah, they are action-packed and entertaining. I started out not really liking the main character, the thinking machine, aka Professor Augustus SFX Van Dusen, PhD, LLD, FRS, MD, MDS. He was as intelligent as Hercule Poirot and Sherlock Holmes, but he's not as kind and really ornery. He's frequently described as saying things really petulantly, and he just seems to be obnoxiously rude in most interactions with others, who he finds to be way dumber than he is. I admired his brain, but I disliked him as a character. His foil, Hutchison Hatch, news reporter, was two-dimensional, but I felt more for that character overall for most of the stories. However, by the time I turned the last page, I actually came to like the old curmudgeon. There was a little bit of character growth over the course of the stories, which is always an enjoyable part when you're reading a series, to see at least some character growth. Frankly, the crabby old man grew on me eventually. Ellison states in the intro that this is not great literature. It is not even the greatest mystery writing. It is good, solid, competent writing. The best story in this book is The Problem of Cell 13. The rest are good, some better than good, a few just adequate. I will not lie to you, Futrelle was a one-hit wonder. He also refers to the stories as kind of like a one-trick pony. Well, I do agree. Some of the stories were fairly formulaic and felt similar to others that I then read later in the collection. I still really enjoyed them all. I eat formulaic shit up like crazy. Why else would I devour cop shows on the regular? I do disagree though about the problem of Cell 13 being like the best of the bunch. This might be more subjective opinion, I guess, but I did really enjoy the solution to that one, and I in fact laughed out loud at part of the conclusion. I think my favorite story from here was the Jackdaw Girl, followed by A Piece of String. I really liked the endings of both of those, were very enjoyable. If you want to venture forth into old-timey mysteries, I think that these are an easy way to ease into them. If you're looking for more intense or complicated or well thought out solutions, I would go for Agatha Christie, particularly Hercule Poirot, but I'm probably biased because he's my favorite. Or you could also check out Dashiell Hammett, his Thin Man series. Those are pretty cool as well. If you're looking for more humor with your mysteries, you can't go wrong with P.G. Wodehouse. But if you want to look at early mysteries to see where even more famous writers caught their inspiration from, you should of course come pay your respects to Jacques Futrelle and the Thinking Machine. So I'm leaving links down below to where I got info from or just kind of checked my facts. As well, I will be listing out books and other media that I mentioned. If I find a link to a couple of the things I was talking about, I'll try to put those down below. All photos I used were found on Google. And as always, folks, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you also are interested in the Titanic or old-timey mysteries and things, I hope you're having a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.